Welcome back. Britain has a big problem, a legal problem, with freedom of the press. Last year, we reported on libel tourists, rich and famous people from around the world who come to London because it's easier to win a libel case in an English court than almost any other. We've also reported on super injunctions, legal rulings that allow big corporations to suppress important news stories and even ban reporting on the fact that they've got that injunction. Free speech campaigners are now saying that English libel law is restricting not only the media, but also scientists, researchers, NGOs, and others from holding the rich and powerful to account. The British government has finally taken notice, saying it plans to reform those laws to level the playing field. However, the reform may not come in time to stop foreign publishers from taking their newspapers and magazines off the shelves in the UK because they're afraid of being sued. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the British libel laws that have an impact far beyond the United Kingdom.
What do we want?
Britain takes a pride in free speech, and yet we have some of the most oppressive libel laws in the free world.
London has become a town named Sue. Sue the BBC, sue Al Jazeera, sue the Times, sue anybody that you care to, because it's almost impossible to lose a libel case in London.
And that's because it costs so much to defend a libel case that few media companies and even fewer individuals can afford it. If they lose, the court may also order defendants to pay their opponents massive legal costs as well.
Almost every lawyer will tell you to settle a libel case. English libel laws cost not just twice the average in Europe, not just 10 times the average in Europe, but over 100 times more than the average in Europe.
Costs these days are anything between £300,000 to £1 million to defend cases, and of course you can double that if you lose your case.
I was sued last year by a man who's a vitamin pill salesman, and he was saying that life-saving anti-AIDS medication was actually going to kill you, and he said the answer to the AIDS epidemic was here, and of course it was vitamin pills.
Goldacre wrote a critical article in the Guardian newspaper, and although he and the newspaper won, it was an expensive victory. They were left with a bill of around £170,000. That's around $280,000 US in legal costs.
If they'd have lost, it would have cost them way over £1 million. Local newspapers can no longer afford to fight libel cases.
These laws don't just take aim at the big media groups who employ journalists. Sometimes the journalists themselves become targets of the unlikeliest claimants. Singh is a British science writer who is being sued by the British Chiropractic Association, a group who specialise in treating people with back pain and other complaints.
I was very concerned about the way chiropractors were treating childhood conditions like asthma, ear infections, colic, and I wrote a critical article about this, and I ended up being sued by the British Chiropractic Association. It's terrifying for me as an individual, but it's also pretty scary and intimidating for publishers as well.
If Simon Singh gives his honestly held opinion in the newspaper or on a blog or wherever, he should be able to exercise that and to say what he thinks honestly and openly without fear of retribution from our libel laws.
You could call that a fair fight. Singh lives in England and is familiar with the laws. They may not be fair, but at least he knows what he's up against. But what if you were a journalist working in a different country with a different set of rules, and all of a sudden you find yourself getting pulled in front of an English court and judged by English law?
We should allow every country to determine whether it's appropriate for that particular country for the particular article or book in question.
But that's not always the case. British courts have been seeing some pretty peculiar cases in recent years. Like the Arabic news channel Al Arabiya, sued in a British court by a Tunisian businessman.
So that is a London court case being heard about a Tunisian man suing a Dubai television station that broadcasts in Arabic. I mean, that's absolute madness.
Across the Atlantic, in the US, some media outlets are finding the British libel chill a little too cold for comfort.
What's extraordinary now is that American newspapers are threatening to block British readers on the internet and withdraw their newspapers from sale in the UK because they don't want to have the risk of being sued in English courts.
We live in a world essentially without borders, and it's virtually impossible to prevent publications from going into other countries. So the UK is basically importing their law into our publishing world because our publishers have to be curtailing what they write, in part because of the fear that they will be sued in Britain.
If you're an American publisher, you might send just a few hundred copies of your newspaper or magazine to London to sell. So you're not making a huge profit, and yet you're exposing yourself to a huge risk.
So American publishers of titles like the Wall Street Journal and New York Times are considering pulling their papers off British newsstands and even blocking access to their websites. And it doesn't end there.
In the UK, jurisdiction can be based on just a single download off of the internet of their story. So even if they never publish a print version in the UK court can get jurisdiction over the US publisher and proceed with a libel trial.
We have an international jurisprudential diplomatic incident occurring. We have states in America, and indeed a federal bill which is currently before the Senate, to stop English libel law judgments being enforced in America.
With recent cases like the super injunction placed on The Guardian by oil giant Trafigura,
preventing The Guardian from reporting a question
the English libel laws are at last making their way onto the parliamentary agenda. But what needs to change?
In the US, you would never be able to stop publication just because it was defamatory, it was a libel. Some of these laws have caused the UK to think about whether their laws should resemble US law more and whether there should be changes to the UK law.
We have to have a libel law which allows people to sue in the country where something is written. You've got to judge it by the rules in the country in which you write.
You're bankrupted the moment somebody decides to take you on. And I think that's unforgivable and unfair. And frankly, I think the law just needs to be scrapped and rewritten.
More Global Village Voices now on media and the law.
The actual laws which govern the media are incredibly restrictive. Now, some people have argued that, in fact, that is a good thing because it does encourage responsibility amongst the media. But it still also counteracts against freedom of expression in the media, freedom of criticism, freedom to express contrary views and to criticize big organizations and bodies and individuals. Many journalists have argued that our libel laws are restrictive enough already. The current trend by the courts has in fact amplified those restrictions.
UK libel law is deviating a long way from international standards, and when we can't even pass the basic tests of being consistent with the US Constitution, which after all is an 18th century document on human rights, we don't even meet 18th century standards for freedom of speech, I think there's something seriously wrong.
Finally, when a famous politician comes out with a new book, there's always an accompanying book tour and a media campaign. When your name is Sarah Palin, though, and you're taking aim at the White House in 2012, it's more of a media blitz. Palin, who was John McCain's running mate last year, has entitled her book Going Rogue. She's not particularly fond of the news media, especially reporters who ask tough questions. And Ms. Palin will not like this collection of jokes and mischievous editing courtesy of some of America's best-known late-night comics, but we're okay with it. We've even made it our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
It seems that Sarah Palin has a book, Going Rogue, okay? Yeah. It's also available 30% off. In the book, Sarah Palin says that she felt ambushed when Katie Couric asked her what newspaper she read. This coming from a woman who hunts wolves from a helicopter.
She spends a lot of the book settling scores with the media, the political elite. She's angry at the weather for raining on her once.
She says that she was upset with John McCain because at the end of the election night, the McCain people would not let her deliver a concession speech. And I thought, don't worry, Sarah. I'm sure you'll get another opportunity.
In Sarah Palin's new book, she says when she first laid eyes on her future husband, she said out loud, "Thank you, God." Yeah, which is the same thing the Democrats said when they first laid eyes on Sarah Palin.
On a segment that is wildly popular. It's entitled Things More Fun Than Reading the Sarah Palin Memoir. Hope you enjoyed it.
Walking into traffic. Getting crushed by a dumpster.
Thank you, God!